Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is planning a special legislative session that will focus on immigration detention contracts and federal funding cuts to healthcare coverage and food assistance for New Mexicans. Meanwhile, a legislative ethics panel has recommended dismissing a complaint against Senate President Pro Tem Mimi Stewart over an alleged verbal altercation with a staffer. The Trump administration has released nearly $7 billion in federal education funds that had been unexpectedly withheld from K-12 public schools. A New Mexico judge has dismissed Alec Baldwin's lawsuit alleging malicious prosecution and civil rights violations in the 2021 fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. And the city of Lordsburg will take over operations of one of its senior centers on August 9th after their medical service provider contract expires. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Thursday, July 31st, and I'll have more on those stories in a few moments, plus a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is sponsored by the Kirtland Partnership Committee, your community partners supporting the powerful missions based at Kirtland Air Force Base. From the 377th Air Base Wing and 58th Special Operations Wing to AFRL, Space Force, NNSA, and Sandia National Labs, Kirtland is a national asset with global impact, and it's all happening right in your backyard. Learn how KPC helps grow missions and support the people behind them at kpcabq.org.
Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is planning a special legislative session, likely in late August or early September, to address major issues including a response to federal health care cuts, food assistance, and legislation banning local governments from contracting with ICE for civil immigration detention, a measure that previously stalled in the Senate. Meanwhile, Senate President Pro Tem Mimi Stewart is unlikely to face sanctions after an ethics subcommittee voted to dismiss a complaint over her alleged verbal outburst towards a staffer, calling her actions unprofessional, but not a violation of the legislature's anti-harassment policy. With more on both of these stories, we now turn to the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief, Dan Boyd. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, at the top, we laid out a lot of what Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is looking to accomplish in this special legislative session, but I'm curious if you could share a little bit more details on exactly what the governor is hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, we've heard for months there's been rumblings of a special session. The governor has been clear that she's considering it even kind of on the final day of this year's session. She floated the idea of a special session kind of dealing with juvenile crime and things like that. But today we got a little more specifics, a little more details than we've had up until now. And it came in an interesting way. The governor's chief legal counsel, Holly Agajanian, was speaking to a legislative committee today. And she was more definitive, saying the governor almost definitely plans to call one, as you mentioned, in that date range, even though an exact date hasn't been set. And then laying out some of the bills that the governor plans to add to the agenda and some of the bills that she likely will wait until the 30-day session in January to propose.
And Dan, as you kind of touched on in that answer, these are all issues we've heard the governor talk about before: juvenile violence, obviously the response to the federal funding cuts to health care and food assistance. But what's really interesting here is this is the first time we've really heard the governor talk about ICE and immigration detention, and it's something she's looking to address in this special session.
Yeah, this is a bill that's been around. There was a similar legislation during this year's 60-day session that would basically kind of prohibit local cities and counties from entering into contracts with ICE, to run these immigrant detention facilities. There's currently 3 of them in New Mexico right now, in Otero County, Torrance County, and then up by Grants. But it was kind of a surprise. We hadn't heard a lot that the governor intending to add this to the special session agenda. But her attorney saying today, that she is intending to do that. And some legislators already kind of starting to express their thoughts on that. And I think some of the logic could be that for Democrats, especially now under the Trump administration, this could be an issue that they could find some consensus on and maybe move on more quickly than, some of the crime bills, which, as we've seen in the past, kind of get bogged down in debate and haven't generated that same level of agreement.
And Dan, should this special session come to pass, it would be the 7th one that the governor has called since she took office in 2019. And obviously this year's was her last 60-day session. Next year will be her last 30-day session before she is termed out of office. So she's looking to accomplish quite a bit in this special session and also that 30-day session next year as well.
Yeah, and I think she's aware that, as you mentioned, she's approaching her final 30-day session as governor and kind of wanting to get some of these issues approved by legislators before she leaves office. But she's had kind of a mixed success with special sessions. During the pandemic, there were some that she did get a lot lot of her agenda approved by lawmakers, and certainly there was a redistricting legislative session. But I think still fresh in a lot of legislators' minds is last year's special session, that she called lawmakers back to Santa Fe to focus on crime issues, and they largely rejected her agenda and adjourned in a matter of hours. So that kind of prompted I think some back and forth criticism with Democratic leaders, and I'm not sure she's totally repaired some of those wounds, with lawmakers.
So Dan, I'm sure you're very excited to hear that you'll probably be back at the Roundhouse a little bit more when this special session does finally get announced. But shifting gears here a little bit to another story you covered dealing with Senate President Pro Tem Mimi Stewart and a complaint that was alleged against her. What can you tell us about this situation?
Yeah, welcome to the kind of Byzantine world of legislative ethics investigations, which is fairly secretive and hard to get a lot of information about. But for some background, Senator Mimi Stewart of Albuquerque is the Senate President Pro Tem. She was accused in a complaint, legislative staffer of kind of berating her both in an email and then a subsequent phone call. This complaint was investigated kind of behind closed doors by a legislative committee. They did find probable cause to move it forward, and there was a public hearing then held last Friday, where they kind of reviewed some of these allegations, and the details became public for the first time. Fast forward then to today, and the subcommittee released its recommendations. So they're not kind of a binding, but they are kind of recommendations to a full Senate committee. And they recommended that the complaint against Senator Mimi Stewart be dismissed and that no sanctions be pursued. And largely because they felt that this incident, while it might have been unprofessional, did not rise to the level of harassment, which is kind of stipulated in a legislative policy.
And Dan, one thing I found really interesting in this story, and it harkens back to a lot of conversations you and I had during the legislative session, party line votes. All of the Democrats on this subcommittee voted to dismiss the complaint. All the Republicans voted to move forward with it. So even in a situation like this, dealing with alleged misconduct, the vote was still along party lines.
Yeah, and that was, I think, perhaps it shouldn't come as a surprise, but yeah, like you mentioned, the three Democratic members of this subcommittee voting, to dismiss the complaint, three Republican members voting, in favor of imposing sanctions. The tie was broken by the seventh member of the subcommittee, who was a retired New Mexico Supreme Court Justice Richard Bosson. Interestingly, that extra position was added in recent years because they kept running into these tie votes. So in this case, he kind of agreed with the Democratic members, but clearly there's some real disagreement between Democrats and Republicans on this. And I think some questions about, how much partisan politics are involved even in these kind of ethics inquiries.
And Dan, my last question on this story, and it has to do with a really interesting angle that it took. Stewart actually apologized to this staffer about her conduct, but is also disputing some of the claims as well. What exactly is she disagreeing with?
Yeah, she, and that was interesting because she before had said she really couldn't comment on it much. And I've been in touch with Senator Stewart some today, and she disputed kind of some of how the staffer characterized their interactions. You're right, she did apologize. And today in a statement, she kind of reiterated that apology and acknowledged that she, had maybe lost her cool a little bit. But I think that there was the question of whether this type of behavior, even if it's unfortunate, should you expect it during the heat of a legislative session? And I think the culture of the legislature has evolved over the years, but certainly anyone who's been at the Roundhouse during a session knows that, people start getting a little impatient, a little lack of sleep, especially when you get to the final days of a session.
So a lot of news coming out of the Roundhouse this week, and I'm sure with an upcoming special legislative session, you'll be plenty busy as well, Dan. Thank you so much for making some time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
In other headlines from the newsroom, the Trump administration has released nearly $7 billion in federal education funds that had been unexpectedly withheld from K-12 public schools, affecting programs for English language learners, immigrant students, and after-school services. New Mexico's Department of Education has not yet received the restored funds, but does expect them soon. The funding freeze, just announced a day before the end of the fiscal year, would have impacted about $40 million for New Mexico schools. In response, New Mexico joined over 20 Democratic-led states in a lawsuit filed on July 14th. State officials and educators welcomed the reversal, calling it a positive step, though details remain unclear. Albuquerque Public Schools said the release of Title II, III, and IV funding will both support students and educators across the state. A New Mexico judge has dismissed Alec Baldwin's lawsuit alleging malicious prosecution and civil rights violations in the 2021 fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the set of the movie Rust. The case was dropped due to inaction but can be reinstated within 30 days. Baldwin's attorney called the dismissal a, quote, non-event, citing ongoing settlement talks and plans to refile if needed. The lawsuit targeted prosecutors, sheriff's investigators, and Santa Fe County officials, accusing them of defamation and politically motivated misconduct. While criminal charges were dropped against Baldwin last year, a civil lawsuit from Hutchinson's family is still ongoing. And the city of Lordsburg will take over operations of the Ina Mitchell Senior Center on August 9th after Hidalgo Medical Services contract expires. The non-metro area Agency on Aging, which funds senior programs across New Mexico, declined to renew Hidalgo Medical Services contract, citing budget mismanagement, overspending, and misrepresentation of local funding. Hidalgo Medical Services denies the allegation, asserting its financial records were reviewed and accepted in the past. The service provider will also stop operating 4 senior centers in Grant County on the same date. In response, Grant County commissioners issued a, quote, no confidence letter, citing concerns with the service provider's staffing, financial transparency, and leadership. Lordsburg, along with Silver City and Santa Clara, will resume control of their local senior services, support from the non-metro area Agency on Aging to ensure the continuity of care for seniors. Lordsburg's mayor praised the transition, affirming the city's commitment to its senior population. The leading news is powered by the journalism of the Albuquerque Journal. If you enjoy hearing all of the stories we share with you here daily, please consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Journal by utilizing the discount code in our show notes. Every subscription helps support local journalism and allows us to provide you with the news that matters to you. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect scattered showers and thunderstorms mainly after 3 p.m., mostly sunny with a high near 93. As for this evening, showers and thunderstorms are likely before midnight, mostly cloudy with a low around 64. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll be back tomorrow.